Ever get that feeling, that you're surrounded by, like, a whole unseen world?
It's true. We are. It's not like ghosts or anything. We're talking
Mhm.
about something way more wild microorganisms.
They're literally everywhere, and honestly, they're calling the shots in ways we're just starting to grasp, I think.
Yeah, microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, the whole gang. They're like the puppet masters of so many things going on inside our bodies, out in the world. You name it.
Okay, I like the way you think. So today we're doing a deep dive. You provided some really fascinating research papers, articles, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And we're going to unpack it all, not just like what these microbes are, but how they work and why we should even care. Because trust me, I've looked at this stuff. It's mind-blowing.
Oh, absolutely. Like, for instance, did you know that the way bacteria reproduce, it's called binary fission? That's actually a key reason why antibiotic resistance is becoming such a huge problem.
Wait, seriously? Okay, hold on. Back up for a second. I know bacteria are single-celled, but how does their way of, like, multiplying make them antibiotic resistant?
Okay, so picture this.
Hmm.
A bacteria cell, it's like a tiny machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it replicates itself. Now, every time it makes a copy, there's this teeny tiny chance it's small. But it's there that a random, let's call it a typo, happens in its genetic code.
Okay, a typo, so like a tiny error in the blueprint.
Exactly. Most of the
Oh.
time, these typos, they're harmless or even deadly to the bacteria itself. But then every now and then, a typo dot creates this new generation that's slightly different.
Tougher.
Cover how so? Well, maybe now it can pump out the antibiotic that's supposed to kill it. Or the antibiotic just doesn't, recognize it anymore.
So it's like the more they reproduce, the more chances they have to get lucky with a good mutation.
Precisely. And some bacteria can double in number every 20 minutes. So we're talking about a lot of chances for these evolutionary lotteries to play out.
Wow, that's kind of scary. It's like a microscopic arms race, constantly evolving. No wonder it's so hard to stay ahead of it.
You got it. It's back and forth all the time. But to understand it better, let's break it down a little. Let's talk about what makes a bacterium a bacterium. They're prokaryotes, which, to put it simply, means they're way simpler than our cells.
Simpler how?
For one, they don't have a nucleus. Their DNA, their instruction manual, it just floats around inside the cell.
Wild. So no tidy control center like our cells. What else makes them unique?
Well, their wardrobe is pretty diverse, if you know what I mean. We're talking about shapes. They come in rods, spirals, spheres, you name it. But here's the really cool part. Some bacteria, they have these external features, like accessories, but for, survival, not fashion.
Accessories for microbes. I like it.
It's,
Tell me more about these bacterial accessories. What do we got?
Some bacteria, for example, have this thing called a capsule. It's basically an extra layer of armor, making them tougher to penetrate.
Like a microscopic force field?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It protects them from things like our immune system or even some antibiotics.
Sneaky. What else is in their arsenal?
Some bacteria have flagella. Imagine, tiny little propellers.
Little motors.
Yeah. Help them move around, swim upstream against bodily fluids.
Hmm.
That's how they navigate their little world.
Okay, so we've got armor, propellers, anything else?
Oh, yeah. Then there are peelies. These are like tiny hair-like structures, but they act like grappling hooks.
Grappling hooks.
Yeah, allowing them to latch onto our tissues. That's usually the first step in an infection. They got to hold on tight.
So they come ready for a fight, armed to the teeth. But how do they actually make us sick? What's their strategy?
Well, some bacteria, they produce these things called toxins. Think of them like poisons that mess with our cells' normal functions.
Okay. Toxins, got it.
There are two main types, exotoxins and endotoxins.
And what's the difference?
Exotoxins are like, poison darts.
Poison darts.
Yeah, that bacteria release into their surroundings, causing damage far and wide. Think of botulism. That's caused by a particularly nasty exotoxin.
Okay, exotoxins, poison darts, got it. What about endotoxins?
Endotoxins are a little more sneaky. They're actually part of the bacteria's cell wall, and they're only released when the bacteria dies.
So it's like a self-destruct mechanism.
Yeah, but it harms both the bacteria and the host.
Wait, so even a dead bacterium can be harmful?
You bet. Endotoxins can set off a massive immune response in our bodies, leading to something called septic shock.
And
It's life-threatening. Your own immune system goes haywire.
that is terrifying. So even in death, they can be pretty formidable opponents. This is why understanding these little guys is so important, right? I mean, if we know their attack strategies, we can develop better defenses.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And speaking of attack strategies, let's talk about viruses.
Hmm.
They operate on a whole other level.
Okay.
Unlike bacteria, which are living organisms, viruses are more like, rogue pieces of genetic code.
Interesting.
They're much simpler in structure, basically some genetic material, either DNA or RNA, all wrapped up in this protein coat called a capsid.
So even smaller and sneakier than bacteria.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Viruses, they can't reproduce on their own. They need to hijack a host cell's machinery to make more copies of themselves.
So they're what? They're like parasites.
We call them obligate intracellular parasites.
Catchy. So how do they pull off this cellular takeover?
It's like a, how should I put it? Like a microscopic heist movie.
Okay, a heist movie. I like it.
So first, the virus has got to find the right target, right? A cell with the right receptors on its surface. It's not just any cell. They're picky.
Picky hijackers. Got it.
They have to be able to, latch on to specific receptors, like finding the right key for a lock.
Okay, so they find the right cell, got the key. What happens next? What's the next scene in our heist movie?
Okay, picture this. The break-in. The virus, it fuses with the cell membrane and releases its genetic material, the blueprint for making more viruses right into the heart of the cell.
And the cell just falls for it.
It's more like the virus has tricked the cell, like it's delivering a package or something. The cell's going to open it.
Sneaky.
Right, and once that viral DNA or RNA is inside, it's game over. The virus takes over the cell's machinery, turns it into a virus factory.
Wow. So the cell is forced to build copies of the very thing that's attacking it. That's kind of brilliant. And terrifying.
It is, isn't it? And remember how we were talking about mutations with bacteria? Well, viruses, they're even better at it. They mutate much faster.
Oh, no, really?
Oh, yeah. Makes it really hard to develop, like, vaccines and treatments that can actually keep up with them.
It's like they're always one step ahead.
Right. Just when our immune system thinks it's got a handle on one strain, boom, new one pops up. With a slightly different disguise.
A constantly moving target. So it's a game of cat and mouse.
Constantly. Now, speaking of sneaky, not all viral infections are these, immediate hostile takeovers. Some viruses, they like to play the long game.
You're talking about those latent infections.
Exactly. Masters of disguise, these ones. They can actually integrate their genetic material into ours, hide out in our cells for years, decades even.
So they're like dormant, just waiting for the right moment to strike.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, we often don't even know we're infected until that virus reactivates, usually when our immune system is down.
So it's like a ticking time bomb. Are there like any well-known examples of that?
Oh, definitely. Think of chicken pox. You get it as a kid, right?
Right.
And then that virus, it goes into hiding in your nerve cells years later, bam. It can reactivate as shingles, which is incredibly painful.
I never realized it was the same virus doing that. Wow. Okay, so we've talked about bacteria, viruses, these microscopic warriors battling our immune system. What about those other members of the microbial world, the ones we don't hear about as much? Fungi and protozoa.
Ugh. Yes, the underdogs of infection. But they're fascinating in their own right. Fungi first, they're actually more closely related to us than you might think. Unlike bacteria, which are prokaryotes, fungi. They're eukaryotes, just like us, meaning they have a nucleus, that tidy control center we talked about where their DNA is stored. And they come in a ton of forms, from, the mushrooms we eat
Right.
to the yeasts used to bake bread.
So not all fungi are bad.
Nope. Many fungi are actually beneficial. They play a huge role in decomposition, nutrient cycling, the whole shebang.
Okay, good to know.
But like any good microbial story, there's a dark side. Some fungi can cause infections. Mycoses, they're called.
Mycoses. Okay, sounds serious. What kind of infections are we talking here?
Well, some are common, relatively harmless. Like athlete's foot, it's caused by a fungus that loves warm, moist environments.
Ugh. Yeah. I've had a run-in with athlete's foot. Not fun. What about more serious fungal infections?
Those usually happen when our immune system is, a little compromised. For example, Candida. It's a type of yeast, normally harmless,
Right.
but it can cause these opportunistic infections, like thrush in the mouth or yeast infection.
Opportunistic, meaning they kind of take advantage when our defenses are down.
Exactly. And then there's this one, Pneumocystis jirovecii.
Try saying that 3 times fast.
I know, right? But it's a nasty fungus, can cause life-threatening pneumonia, especially in people with weakened immune systems.
Like those with HIV/AIDS.
Exactly.
It's a good reminder. Our immune systems are fighting battles we don't even realize.
All the time.
Okay, what about protozoa? I'll be honest, they've always sounded a bit mysterious to me.
Protozoa. They're another diverse bunch. Like fungi, they're eukaryotes. But unlike fungi, they're single-celled organisms. And they don't have a cell wall.
So even more stripped down than fungi.
In a way, yeah. And they get around in some pretty interesting ways. Some have these little hair-like structures called cilia that help them move. Others use a whip-like tail, a flagellum.
Sounds a bit like bacteria with their flagella.
Yeah, there are definitely some parallels. Now, most protozoa, they're free-living, totally harmless.
Okay, good.
But some are parasitic,
Yeah.
meaning they rely on a host for survival. And that's when things can get, shall we say, not so good for us.
Because those parasitic protozoa, they can cause some serious problems. Malaria, for one.
Absolutely. Malaria is caused by a protozoan parasite called Plasmodium.
Okay.
It's transmitted through mosquito bites, those pesky mosquitoes.
Right, and it infects your red blood cells, which is really dangerous.
It is. Malaria is a huge problem worldwide, especially in those tropical and subtropical regions.
Definitely.
But it's not the only protozoan disease out there. There's amoebic dysentery, which is caused by Entamoeba histolytica, another mouthful.
Sounds unpleasant.
It infects the intestines. And then there's Giardia.
Oh, right, Giardia. Isn't that a protozoan, too?
Good memory. Yeah, often spread through contaminated water. Notorious for causing what we call hiker's diarrhea.
Okay, I am definitely not Googling that later.
Huh.
But it's amazing when you think about it, how these tiny organisms, they can cause so much trouble.
It really is. And it all comes back to this idea of transmission. How these microbes get around, from person to person, animal to person. Some are definitely better at spreading than others.
So how do they do it? How do these little invaders make their way from one person to another? What are the main, routes of transmission?
Well, you've got your direct contact, which is pretty self-explanatory. Catching an infected lesion, sexual contact, coming into contact with infected blood or, other bodily fluids, that sort of thing.
Close encounters of the microbial kind, gotcha. What about indirect contact?
Ah, that's where it gets a little sneakier. Indirect contact involves a middleman, like a contaminated surface or an object. We call them fomites.
Fomites. Okay,
Yeah.
so give me some examples. What kind of everyday objects are we talking?
Think doorknobs, phones, keyboards, even that pen you borrowed from a coworker who may or may not have sneezed into their hand.
Oh my gosh, I am suddenly hyper aware of everything I'm touching right now. Okay, so we've got direct contact, indirect contact. What else? What other sneaky ways do these microbes have to get around?
Ah, yes. We're getting to the airborne assassins. Many respiratory infections, they spread through what we call droplet transmission.
Yeah.
So when an infected person, coughs or sneezes,
Right.
they expel these tiny droplets of saliva, mucus, and all that. Can contain the infectious agent.
And those droplets, they can travel surprisingly far, I swear. Sometimes you can be across the room from someone who sneezes, and you can practically feel those germs landing on you.
It's true. They could travel up to 6 feet. That's why it's so important to cover your mouth and nose, cough etiquette. But then you've got aerosol transmission. Even sneaky.
Even sneakier.
Aerosols are even tinier than droplets, and they can hang in the air for much longer, travel farther too. Think of it like this. Someone sneezes. It's like a germ cloud, right?
Right.
Those aerosol particles, they're little ninjas floating around. You can't even see them. And anyone who breathes them in, potentially infected.
That's terrifying. That's what makes those N95 masks so important, right, for those airborne diseases, because they filter out those tiny particles.
Exactly. Like a fine mesh net. Catches those ninja germs before they can even get into your system.
Okay, so we've got direct contact, indirect contact, and now airborne assassins. Anything else?
Or have we covered all the modes of transportation in the microbial world?
Well, we can't forget about vector-borne infections. These are spread by insects or
It's
animals.
like mosquitoes spreading malaria or ticks transmitting Lyme disease. You got it. It's often like insects that bite. They draw blood from an infected person or animal, and then bam, they pass it on when they bite someone else.
Like a microscopic relay race, with us as the unfortunate finish line.
Pretty much. But here's the thing. Even if you're exposed to one of these infectious agents, it doesn't automatically mean you're going to get sick.
Right. Our immune system comes into play here, right? That's our defense system.
Huge role. Our immune system is incredible. It's like this internal defense force, always on patrol, figuring out who's friend or foe, neutralizing threats.
Our own personal army, always on alert. But our immune systems, they're not foolproof, are they?
Sadly not, no.
Yeah.
A lot of things can weaken our defenses, makes us more susceptible to infection.
Like age, right. Babies and older adults, their immune systems aren't as strong.
Exactly. And it's not just age. Underlying health conditions, certain medications, even stress, all that can impact how well our immune system works.
Wow. It's amazing how everything's connected. Our genetics, our stress levels, it all plays a role in how vulnerable we are to these tiny invaders.
Totally. And then, of course, there's the flip side, the microbe's virulence.
Right, because not all microbes are created equal, right? Some are just way better at making us sick than others, more aggressive.
Exactly. That's what virulence is. Basically how good a microbe is at its job, which is, in this case, making us sick. It's determined by a bunch of things: how well it can invade our tissues, how much of that nasty toxin it produces, and how good it is at, like, dodging our immune system's attacks.
So it's this like constant evolutionary arms race. Microbes are evolving, trying to get better at infecting us, and our bodies are evolving to fight them off.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's been going on for millions of years. Fascinating, really.
And thankfully, in the meantime, we've developed some pretty impressive weapons to fight back.
Drug tech.
Drug therapy, yeah. It's like having this, secret weapon in our back pocket. But as you were saying earlier, it's not always a simple solution. We were talking about antibiotics earlier. They're amazing, obviously lifesavers when it comes to those bacterial infections. But antibiotic resistance, that's a scary thought.
It is, yeah. It's actually one of the biggest threats to, well, global health today. We've got to take it seriously.
Okay, so let's back up again just for a second. How do antibiotics work exactly? I mean, they target bacteria specifically, but how? What are they doing?
They're like, specialized assassins, I guess you could say. They go after specific weak points in bacterial cells.
Okay, weak points like, give me an example.
Take penicillin, for instance, one of the first discovered antibiotics. Penicillin, it messes with how bacteria build their cell walls.
Ah, their walls. So no cell wall, no protection. Makes sense.
Right. No more fort to protect them. Now, other antibiotics, they target different things, like protein synthesis, for example.
Which basically means...
It's preventing the bacteria from making the proteins they need to, do their thing, survive. The problem is bacteria. They're incredibly adaptable. They're always evolving. And sometimes those changes, they make the bacteria resistant to our antibiotics.
So they're like, what, developing immunity to our weapons?
Sort of, yeah. Remember those mutations we talked about?
Right, the typos.
Sometimes a mutation, it'll allow a bacterium to pump the antibiotic right out of its cell before the antibiotic can even do any damage. Or a mutation might change, like the structure of the antibiotic's target, so the drug can't latch on anymore.
So it's like they're putting up a force field or changing the locks on their doors, and we're stuck trying to break in with old keys.
That's a great way to put it. And the more we overuse antibiotics or misuse them, we're just speeding up that process, giving them more chances to evolve.
Okay, so what do you mean? What are we doing wrong? When are we misusing them?
Well, a lot of people take antibiotics for things like, colds or the flu, viral infections.
Right.
Antibiotics can't treat those. So what happens is you're exposing the bacteria in your body to the drug unnecessarily, and that just increases the chances of resistance developing.
So taking antibiotics when you don't need them, it's like giving the enemy a practice run at fighting off your weapons.
Yes, exactly. And then there's the issue of not finishing the whole course of antibiotics.
Oh, right. I'll be honest, I'm guilty of that. If I start feeling better, I just stop taking them.
I know, it's tempting. But even if you're feeling better, it doesn't mean all the bacteria are actually gone. The ones that are left, they're often the toughest ones, the ones that get handled the antibiotic in the first place.
Oh, so I'm basically, creating a breeding ground for superbugs by stopping early?
Pretty much, yeah. And those resistant bacteria, they can spread to other people, and the problem just gets worse and worse.
Wow, okay. I am never stopping my antibiotics early again. Lesson learned. Antibiotics, double-edged sword. Powerful tools, but we have to be careful with them. So what about viruses then? Are they as easy to treat?
Viruses, they're trickier. Remember, they use our own cells' machinery to replicate.
Right, like little hijackers.
So it's really hard to find a drug that's going to target the virus, but not harm our own cells in the process.
It's like trying to dismantle a bomb that's wired to your own life support system or something. Very delicate. But we do have antiviral drugs, right?
We do. And they've been crucial for viruses like, HIV and hepatitis C. But they come with their own challenges. Compared to antibiotics, they're often not as effective, can have worse side effects, and viruses, well, they can develop resistance to antivirals too.
Ugh, so it's just a constant back and forth, isn't it? Scientists develop new treatments, the viruses mutate and become resistant. It never ends.
That's the microbial world for you. Always evolving. But there's definitely hope. Scientists are working on new approaches all the time, new ways to target these viruses.
Like what?
Well, some scientists are looking at targeting, like, host cell proteins.
Host cell proteins, so the ones in our cells.
Exactly. Because some of those proteins are essential for the viruses to replicate, if we can target those.
Smart. Cut off their supply chain, so to speak.
Exactly. And there's been a lot of research into these broad-spectrum antivirals, which they could potentially work against a whole bunch of different viruses.
Oh, wow. That would be incredible. So there's definitely hope for better treatments in the future.
Oh, absolutely. And in the meantime, don't forget about our other weapon,
Yeah.
vaccines. Still our best bet at preventing those viral infections in the first place.
Right. Prevention is key. Man, this deep dive has been amazing. Thank you so much for this.
Of course, it's been my pleasure.
We've gone from, like, bacteria with their tiny little grappling hooks to viruses hijacking our cells. And even touched on those, what you call them, the underdogs?
The underdogs, yeah. Fungi and protozoa.
It's incredible when you think about it, this whole complex, diverse world of microbes and how much they really do impact our lives.
They really do. And the craziest thing is, this is just the tip of the iceberg, there's still so much more we don't know about these microbes, like how they all interact with each other, how they influence our environment. Who knows what we'll discover?
They could hold the key to solving all sorts of problems, right? New antibiotics, maybe.
Exactly. Or even using microbes to, like, clean up pollution. The possibilities are really endless.
It's humbling, to think about these little organisms, this whole unseen universe surrounding us.
It is.
And how they're just doing their thing, but they have this huge impact. So, yeah. Next time I think about germs, I'll try to remember that. That they're not just something to be avoided, but they're pretty amazing, actually.
They are.
Who knows what secrets they hold? Maybe the key to the future. Thanks again for joining us. It's been a fascinating deep dive.